Moonlight sliced through the dense canopy, casting jagged shadows on the gnarled oak in the heart of Blackwater Creek's forsaken woods. Texas, 1876. Nocona, a Comanche warrior built like a storm-carved cliff, hung from a thick branch, his wrists raw and bleeding under coarse ropes that bit into his flesh. Blood seeped from a gash across his chest, staining his buckskin shirt, each drop glistening like obsidian in the pale light. His arms strained, muscles taut as bowstrings, fighting the weight of his own body. Above, a rattlesnake slithered along the branch, its scales scraping bark, tongue flicking as if tasting his fading strength. Every shallow breath Nocona drew was a battle, his dark eyes burning with defiance despite the pain clawing his body. The night was still, save for the creak of ropes and the distant howl of a coyote. Nocona's gaze drifted upward, where the snake's cold eyes locked on his, waiting for him to break. His lips cracked, blood and dust caking his face, and he rasped, "Please, just make it quick." Not a plea for death, but for release. Any escape from this slow torment. His voice, rough as gravel, barely carried over the rustling leaves. From the shadows, a small figure emerged, stepping into the moon's ghostly glow. Sarah Dawson, barely 10, looked like a specter in her tattered black and white dress, a worn brown vest hanging loose on her slight frame. Her oversized cowboy hat tilted low, shadowing her wide, trembling eyes. Dirt smudged her cheeks, and her hands shook, but there was a spark in her gaze. Something fierce, unyielding, like a spark in dry grass. She clutched a small knife, its blade nicked, but sharp, glinting as she moved. Sarah's boots, too big for her feet, scuffed the earth as she approached the oak. She glanced at the snake, its hiss cutting the air like a blade, and her breath hitched. Still, she set her jaw and placed a foot on the tree's rough trunk, digging her toes into the bark. The climb was slow, deliberate. Each scrape of her boots, each crack of a twig, sounded like thunder in the silent forest. The snake coiled tighter, its head inching closer, tongue darting as if daring her to falter. Sarah's heart pounded, loud enough to drown out the world, but she didn't stop. Nocona's eyes widened, catching the glint of her knife. "Go, kid," he croaked, voice barely a whisper. "Run." But Sarah shook her head, her hat wobbling as she climbed higher, gripping the branch with one hand. The rope creaked under Nocona's weight, and the snake's rattle buzzed, a warning that sent chills down her spine. Her small fingers fumbled with the knife, slicing at the blood-soaked ropes binding Nocona's wrists. The blade caught, then cut, each fiber snapping like a gunshot in her ears. A gust of wind shook the tree, and Sarah clung tight, her knuckles white. The snake lunged, its fangs grazing the air an inch from her cheek. She froze, breath caught, but her hand kept moving, sawing through the rope. Blood from Nocona's wrists smeared her fingers, slick and warm. "Hold on," she whispered, more to herself than to him. The snake hissed again, slithering closer, but Sarah's focus was iron. The final rope on his left wrist gave way, and Nocona's arm dropped, his body swinging hard, nearly pulling her off the branch. From the darkness, a low, mocking laugh broke the silence. Sarah's knife slipped, nearly falling, as a voice slithered through the air. "Good job, Sarah. But you think I'd let it be that easy?" A boy, no older than 15, stepped into the moonlight. Eli Malone, clad in a battered leather coat, his eyes gleaming with a cruelty too old for his years. His knife glinted as he leaned against a tree, watching like a vulture circling a dying steer. "You were supposed to lead him to us, not play hero." Sarah's face paled, her eyes darting between Eli and Nocona. She'd been forced here, a pawn in Eli Malone's game, her family in Redstone held hostage by his father, Jack Malone, a bounty hunter with a taste for Comanche scalps. But now, with the ropes half cut, her choice was clear. She gritted her teeth, slicing the last rope. Nocona crashed to the ground, gasping, alive. The snake recoiled, vanishing into the shadows. Eli's smile vanished. "You little traitor," he snarled, stepping forward, knife raised. Sarah's hand shook, but she held her ground, staring into the eyes of the boy who'd turned her into bait. Nocona, struggling to rise, locked eyes with her, a silent vow forming between them. The night was far from over, and the hunters were closing in. Sarah's trembling hand gripped the knife, her eyes locked on Eli Malone's snarling face as he advanced, his blade catching the moonlight like a sliver of ice. Nocona, slumped against the dirt at Blackwater Creek, Texas, 1876, struggled to rise, his chest wound oozing dark blood that pooled in the dust. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine and fear, the rattlesnake's hiss fading into the night. Sarah's defiance had shattered Eli's plan, but the boy's rage promised no mercy. Nocona's gaze met hers, a silent pact forged in that fleeting moment. They would not die here. Sarah lunged, her small frame darting forward as she hurled her knife at Eli's hand. The blade struck true, slicing his palm, and his weapon clattered to the ground with a dull thud. Eli howled, clutching his bleeding hand, his face twisting like a wounded coyote's. "You'll pay for that, cousin," he spat, voice sharp as a whip crack. Sarah didn't wait. She grabbed Nocona's arm, her thin fingers digging into his buckskin sleeve, and yanked him toward the shadowed underbrush. His weight nearly toppled her, but fear fueled her strength, and they stumbled into the thicket, branches clawing at their skin. The forest floor was a maze of roots and thorns, each step a gamble in the dark. Nocona, gritting his teeth against the pain, leaned on Sarah, his breath ragged but steady. "Keep moving, kid," he rasped, his voice like gravel underfoot. Sarah's oversized hat flopped as she led them toward the faint gurgle of Blackwater Creek, its cold waters their only hope to mask their trail. Behind them, Eli's shouts echoed, joined by the distant baying of hounds. Jack Malone's men were closing in, their lanterns flickering like fireflies in the gloom. Sarah's boots sank into the muddy bank as they reached the creek. The water was frigid, biting through her thin dress, but she waded in, pulling Nocona with her. "They'll lose our scent here," she whispered, her voice trembling but sure. Nocona nodded, his dark eyes scanning the trees for movement. He tore a strip from his shirt, wrapping it tight around his chest to staunch the bleeding. Each movement a grimace of pain. The creek's current tugged at their legs, and Sarah's small hand clung to his, guiding him downstream where the rocks offered cover. A twig snapped upstream, sharp as a gunshot. Sarah froze, her heart hammering like a blacksmith's forge. Eli's voice cut through the night, closer now. "You can't run forever, Sarah. Pa's gonna skin you both." The hound's howls grew louder, their paws churning the earth. Nocona's hand tightened on hers, and he pointed to a cluster of willows, their drooping branches forming a curtain over the bank. They ducked beneath, the damp leaves brushing their faces, and crouched in the shallow water, breath held as lantern light swept the opposite shore. Sarah's eyes darted to Nocona, expecting defeat, but found only resolve. "Why'd you do it, kid?" he murmured, his voice low as the creek's murmur. "You're one of them." Sarah's lips quivered, and she whispered, "They made me. Eli's my cousin, but he and Jack, they're monsters. They've got my aunt in Redstone, said they'd kill her if I didn't lure you out." Her voice cracked, but her gaze held firm. "I couldn't let you die." Nocona's jaw tightened, his weathered face unreadable. He'd known betrayal, but this, a child risking everything for a stranger, stirred something deep, like a spark in a long, cold fire. He reached into his belt, pulling a small bone-handled dagger, its edge worn but lethal. "Take this," he said, pressing it into her hand. "You're no pawn anymore." The hound's baying grew frantic, and hoofbeats thundered closer. Sarah's fingers closed around the dagger, its weight grounding her racing heart. Nokona gestured toward a narrow ravine downstream, where the creek cut through jagged rocks. "We move now, or we're done," he said, his voice steady despite the blood soaking his bandage. They slipped from the willows, wading deeper, the icy water numbing their legs. Sarah's dress clung to her skin, but she pushed forward, the dagger clutched tight. As they reached the ravine, a shadow loomed ahead, a lone rider, silhouetted against the dawn's first gray light. Sarah's breath caught, fearing Jack Malone himself, but the figure dismounted, revealing a weathered man in a duster coat, his rifle slung low. "Stay where you are," he called, voice rough but not cruel. Nokona tensed, ready to fight, but Sarah's eyes widened. "Uncle Will," she whispered, recognizing her father's brother, Will Dawson, a drifter who'd vanished years ago. Will's gaze flicked from Sarah to Nokona, his hand hovering near his revolver. "What's a Comanche doing with my niece?" he demanded, suspicion thick as dust. Sarah stepped forward, voice urgent. "He's not the enemy, Uncle. Jack Malone is. He's hunting us both." Will's eyes narrowed, but the sound of approaching hounds cut through his doubt. "Move," he growled, tossing Sarah onto his horse and helping Nokona climb behind. The ravine's walls closed in as they rode, the hunters' shouts fading, but not gone. Sarah clung to the saddle, the dagger in her hand, a promise of the fight still to come. The hoofbeats of Will Dawson's horse thundered through the ravine, Sarah clinging to the saddle, her small hands tight around the bone-handled dagger Nokona had given her. Behind, Nokona gripped the saddle's edge, his blood-soaked bandage stark against his buckskin shirt, the pain in his chest a dull roar as the dawn's gray light broke over Texas, 1876. Will's duster coat flapped like a vulture's wings, his eyes scanning the jagged rocks of Devil's Ridge for signs of Jack Malone's hunters. The hound's baying had faded, but the air still crackled with danger, like a storm waiting to break. Dust swirled as Will reined the horse onto the open plains near Eagle Pass, the horizon stretching wide under a sky bruised with clouds. Sarah's oversized hat bounced with each gallop, her heart pounding not just from fear, but from the weight of her choice. She'd defied her cousin Eli and the brutal Jack Malone, trading her family's safety for Nokona's life. Will's gruff voice cut through her thoughts. "You sure about this, Sarah? Running with a Comanche ain't no game." She nodded, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. "I'm sure, Uncle. They're the monsters, not him." Nokona, swaying in the saddle, caught her words. His dark eyes, sharp as flint, softened for a moment. He'd seen trust broken too many times. Yet this girl's defiance stirred something fierce in him, a debt he'd repay, no matter the cost. Will grunted, unconvinced, but focused, steering the horse toward a shallow valley where a herd of wild mustangs grazed, their manes catching the first rays of sun like threads of fire. "We need a fresh mount," he muttered. "This one's near done." Will dismounted, his boots kicking up red dirt, and motioned for Nokona to stay low. Sarah slid down, her dress snagging on the saddle, the dagger still clutched tight. Nokona, despite his wounds, moved with a predator's grace, his eyes locked on a black stallion at the herd's edge. He whispered words in Comanche, soft as a breeze, and the horse's ears flicked, its hooves pawing the earth. Sarah watched, mesmerized, as Nokona approached, his bloodied hand steady, until the stallion bowed its head, letting him grip its mane. A sharp crack split the air, A rifle shot, kicking up dirt near Will's feet. Sarah spun, her heart lurching as Jack Malone's voice boomed from a ridge above. "You're mine, Dawson! You and that traitor niece!" 5 riders crested the hill, Jack at the lead, his weathered face twisted with rage, Eli at his side, his hand bandaged, but gripping a pistol. The hounds, leashed now, snarled at their heels, their eyes glinting like coals. Will drew his revolver, firing a shot that grazed a rider's arm, sending him tumbling from his horse. "Get to the stallion!" Will shouted, shoving Sarah toward Nocona. Bullets whined past, splintering a nearby mesquite tree. Nocona hauled Sarah onto the Mustang's back, her small frame pressed against his chest as he swung up behind her. Will fired again, his shots keeping the hunters at bay, but a bullet clipped his hat, sending it spinning into the dirt. "Go!" he roared, mounting his own horse and spurring it toward a dry creek bed. The Mustang surged forward, its hooves pounding like war drums across the valley. Sarah's hat flew off, her hair whipping in the wind as she clung to the mane. Nocona's arm steadied her, his breath hot against her ear. "Hold tight, kid," he growled, urging the horse toward a cluster of boulders that offered cover. Behind them, Jack's riders fanned out, their shouts carrying over the plains like a pack of wolves closing in. Sarah's eyes burned with tears, not from fear, but from the fire of survival. She thought of the stories Nocona might tell, of courage under starlit skies, and wished the world could hear them too. "If you're out there listening to this tale," she whispered, as if to an unseen crowd, "join us by subscribing to keep these stories alive. Share where you're hearing this from. It's a spark that keeps us going." Her voice, though soft, carried the grit of the frontier, a plea woven into the chaos without breaking its rhythm. The creek bed loomed, its banks steep and shadowed. Nocona steered the Mustang down, rocks clattering under its hooves. Will followed, blood seeping through his sleeve from a graze, his face set like stone. Jack's riders closed in, their bullets kicking up sprays of dirt. Eli's voice rang out, venomous. "You can't outrun me, Sarah." A shot grazed the Mustang's flank, making it rear, but Nocona held firm, his strength a shield for Sarah. As they rounded a bend, a narrow gap in the creek bed appeared, barely wide enough for a horse. "There!" Sarah pointed, her voice sharp. Nocona nodded, urging the Mustang through, its side scraping rock. Will followed, his horse snorting as bullets ricocheted off the walls. The gap opened into a hidden gully, thick with sagebrush, masking their trail. For now, they'd slipped the noose, but Jack's rage echoed behind them, a promise of pursuit that would not fade with the dawn. The sagebrush gully swallowed the sound of hoofbeats as Sarah, Nocona, and Will emerged into the twilight shadows of Devil's Ridge, Texas, 1876. The Mustang's flanks heaved, steam rising from its coat in the cool evening air. Sarah's small hands gripped the dagger, its bone handle warm against her palm, while Nocona's bloodied arm steadied her, his breath shallow but unyielding. Will, his sleeve dark with blood from a bullet graze, scanned the rocky horizon, his revolver still drawn. Jack Malone's riders were out there, their pursuit relentless, but the hidden gully had bought them time, a fragile shield against the storm. Night fell hard, the sky a velvet shroud pierced by stars. Will led them to a shallow cave carved into the ridge, its mouth half hidden by tangled mesquite. "We rest here," he growled, his voice rough as sandstone. "But keep your eyes open." Sarah slid off the Mustang, her legs trembling from the day's flight, her dress caked with dust and creek mud. Nocona dismounted with a grimace, his chest wound seeping through the makeshift bandage, but his eyes burned with a warrior's fire, scanning the darkness for threats. Inside the cave, the air was damp, smelling of earth and moss. Will struck a match, its flicker casting jagged shadows on the walls. Sarah huddled near Nokona, her small frame dwarfed by his, the dagger still clutched like a lifeline. "You ain't like most kids," Nokona said, his voice low, like the rumble of distant thunder. "What's driving you, girl?" Sarah's eyes dropped to the cave floor, tracing the cracks in the stone. "My pa, Will's brother, taught me to do what's right, even when it hurts. Jack Malone took everything. My home, my aunt, my freedom. I won't let him take you, too." Nokona nodded, his weathered face unreadable, but a spark of respect glinted in his eyes. He began to speak, his words slow, deliberate, painting tales of Comanche riders galloping under moonlit plains, their lives bound to the land Jack's kind sought to steal. Sarah listened, her fear easing as the stories wove a fragile bridge between their worlds. Will, tending the Mustang's grazed flank, glanced over, his suspicion of Nokona softening, though his hand never strayed far from his gun. A faint glow flickered outside the cave, like a star fallen to earth. Sarah's breath caught, her fingers tightening on the dagger. Will doused the match, plunging them into darkness, and crept to the entrance, revolver ready. "Stay put," he whispered, peering through the mesquite. The glow grew. Torches, moving like specters through the gully. Jack Malone's voice slithered through the night, cold and sharp. "I know you're here, Dawson. You and that Comanche dog. Hand him over, and Sarah might live." Nokona rose, ignoring the pain lancing his chest, and gripped a jagged rock from the cave floor. Sarah's eyes widened, but she followed his lead, scooping up a fist-sized stone, her heart pounding like a war drum. Will signaled for silence, his face grim as he counted 5 silhouettes against the torchlight. Jack, Eli, and 3 hired guns, their rifles glinting like vipers' fangs. The hounds, leashed but restless, growled low, their noses twitching for a scent. Without warning, Sarah hurled her stone, her aim honed by years of skipping rocks on Redstone's creeks. It struck one of the hired guns square in the chest, knocking the wind from him. He stumbled, cursing, and the hounds surged, snapping their leashes. Chaos erupted. Nokona lunged from the cave, rock in hand, and cracked it against another gunman's skull, sending him sprawling. Will fired, his bullet catching a third man in the leg, but Eli charged, his bandaged hand wielding a knife aimed at Sarah. Sarah ducked, the blade whistling past her ear, and slashed with her dagger, slicing Eli's coat. He snarled, grabbing her wrist, but Nokona tackled him, their bodies rolling in the dirt. Jack fired, the bullet grazing Nokona's shoulder, drawing fresh blood. Sarah screamed, scrambling to her feet, and kicked Eli's dropped knife toward Nokona. He seized it, pinning Eli beneath him, but Jack's rifle clicked, aimed at Nokona's back. Will tackled Jack, the 2 men crashing into the sagebrush, fists and steel flashing. Sarah, heart racing, grabbed a torch from the ground and swung it at the remaining gunman, the flames singeing his arm. He fled, the hounds scattering into the night. Nokona rose, blood dripping, and helped Will pin Jack, whose face twisted with rage. Eli writhed, spitting curses, but Sarah stood over him, dagger raised. "Stop, or I swear I'll end this," she said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. Jack laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You're no killer, girl." But Sarah's eyes, hard as flint, silenced him. Nokona nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her strength. The fight paused, the gully quiet save for the crackle of torches. Will tied Jack and Eli with their own ropes, but the danger wasn't over. More of Jack's men roamed the plains. Nokona, swaying from blood loss, pointed to a faint trail leading deeper into the ridge. "We move at dawn," he said, his voice a low growl. Sarah clutched the dagger, ready for whatever lay ahead, as the stars watched in silence. The stars faded as dawn crept over Devil's Ridge, Texas, 1876, painting the sky in streaks of gold and ash. Sarah clutched the bone-handled dagger, its weight a quiet anchor in her trembling hands, as she followed Nokona's unsteady steps along the faint trail. Will trailed behind, dragging the bound Jack and Eli Malone, their wrists chafed raw by their own ropes. The gully's silence was a fragile truce, broken only by the crunch of boots on gravel and the distant cry of a hawk. Jack's venomous glare bored into Sarah, but her eyes, hard as the flint in these hills, held no fear, only resolve forged in the night's fire. The trail wound toward Clearwater Springs, a cluster of cottonwood shimmering in the morning light, their leaves whispering promises of refuge. Sarah's dress, torn and caked with dust, clung to her skin, but she walked tall, the oversized cowboy hat long gone, her hair a wild tangle framing her determined face. Nokona, blood seeping through his bandages, moved with a warrior's grit, his shoulder wound fresh from the fight. Will, his arm grazed and face etched with exhaustion, kept his revolver close, wary of Jack's men still prowling the plains. They reached a weathered homestead nestled in the valley, its sagging porch and faded barn a testament to hard years under the Texas sun. Mary Thompson, a wiry woman with hands calloused from work, stood at the door, her eyes narrowing at the sight of a Comanche warrior and a bloodied drifter with 2 prisoners in tow. Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady. "Ma'am, we need help. They're hunting us. Jack Malone's men. Nokona's hurt bad." Mary's gaze softened at Sarah's plea, and she nodded, ushering them inside. "No one's dying on my land today," she said, her voice firm as iron. The homestead's interior smelled of wood smoke and fresh bread, a stark contrast to the blood and dust of their flight. Mary set to work, boiling water and tearing cloth for bandages, her hands deft as she cleaned Nokona's wounds. Sarah sat close, watching every stitch, her small fingers still gripping the dagger. Nokona's eyes met hers, a flicker of gratitude passing between them. "You're a long way from Redstone, girl," Mary said, glancing at Sarah. "What's a child doing in this mess?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "Jack Malone used me to trap Nokona. I broke his plan. Now he wants us all dead." Will, guarding the prisoners in the corner, spat into the dirt floor. "Jack's a snake, but he ain't alone. His men'll come for him." Jack, bound to a chair, sneered. "You think this is over, Dawson? My boys'll burn this place to ash." Eli, slumped beside him, glared at Sarah, his bandaged hand twitching. "You're dead, cousin," he hissed. Sarah didn't flinch, her gaze cold as a winter creek. She'd faced their evil and found her own strength. Mary handed Nokona a tin cup of water, her eyes sharp. "You can't stay. A Comanche here'll draw every bounty hunter from Eagle Pass to Redstone." Nokona nodded, his voice low. "I'm heading to my people, north of the Llano. But the girl, she's earned my debt." He reached into his belt, pulling a necklace of eagle feathers and bone beads, its craftsmanship speaking of Comanche hands. He placed it in Sarah's palm. "For courage," he said, his voice like the wind over the plains. Sarah's fingers closed around it, her eyes bright with something new. Pride. Will untied Jack and Eli, shoving them toward the barn. "You'll stay locked up till we're gone," he growled, securing the door with a heavy chain. But as he turned, a distant rumble shook the air. Hoofbeats, too many to count. Sarah's heart sank. She ran to the window, peering through the warped glass. Dust clouds rose on the horizon, riders approaching fast, their silhouettes dark against the rising sun. "It's them," she whispered, gripping the dagger tighter. Nokona stood, swaying but resolute, and grabbed a rifle from Mary's wall. "We fight or we run," he said, his eyes scanning the room. Mary tossed Will a shotgun, her face set like stone. "Ain't no running from this," she said. Sarah, small but fierce, stepped beside Nocona, the eagle feather necklace swinging against her chest. Will cracked the shotgun's breech, loading shells. "Get to the loft, Sarah. Cover us from above." She climbed the ladder to the barn's loft, her movement swift despite the ache in her limbs. Through a slatted window, she saw Jack's men. 8 riders, armed to the teeth, circling the homestead. Nocona and Will took positions behind the porch, Mary at the door, their weapons glinting in the dawn. Sarah's hands shook as she aimed the dagger, ready to throw if the fight came close. The riders halted, their leader shouting, "Give us Malone or we burn it all!" Nocona's voice answered, steady as rock. "Come take him, then." Gunfire erupted, bullets splintering wood and kicking up dirt. Sarah's breath hitched, but she held her ground. The necklace a reminder of the warrior who'd trusted her. The fight for Clearwater Springs had begun, and with it, a new chapter for a girl who'd found her place in a world of blood and dust. The dust settles at Clearwater Springs, where Sarah and Nocona's defiance lit a spark in the Texas dawn of 1876. Their fight against Jack Malone's shadow proves that courage can rise from the smallest hearts. What did their journey stir in you? Could you face such odds, or would fear win? Share your thoughts below. Your voice keeps these tales alive. We're grateful for every listener who rides with us through these frontier stories. And we'll meet again under the next moon, where new battles and bonds await. Stay sharp and keep the fire of these stories burning.